With Fallout Season 2 on the horizon, we figured we'd have another popper to crash course, and help prep the show-only watchers for what may be in store in the second season with a bit of bare-bones background lore on this place. Please be aware, like the first guide, this isn't a video about hidden lore or never-before-known elements. This vid is more, hey, like the show but never played the games, or just want a quick refresh of the basics before you dive back into the series, we've got you covered. Like, hype and subscribe. Have to say that to please the bloody robots. The wacky world of Fallout takes place on a diverging timeline to ours, which most believe begins in earnest just after World War II. Up until this point, its timeline shares pretty much the same history as ours, though later games and lore have suggested there may have been some divergence before this, because, well, Bethesda. The Big Daddy divergence between both timelines is often thought to be a monumental delay in the invention of the transistor. You know, these tiny little switches that irreversibly changed the world of electronics and computing, and it's definitely the most logical conclusion to reach. But it's a suggestion not without its contention even by the various creators of the world themselves, and no one really knows the truth. The divergence is mysterious, and intentionally so. All we can say with any certainty is the timeline of Fallout forsakes putting skill points into tech miniaturization, and instead specs more heavily into nuclear technology, vacuum tubes, and robotics. For some reason, this also causes the culture of 50s America to stagnate. Communism in all its forms remains America's public enemy number one. The retro-futuristic atomic age aesthetic of the 1950s endures and carries through into technological advancements from household butler robots, nuclear-powered cars, all the way to the military, where weapons and tech that were only thought possible in cheap naff 1950s B-movies, like laser guns, plasma rifles, and power armor, become a very real thing. The Cold War still happens, but it doesn't remain cold, gradually getting warmer and warmer as the West and the East gradually take little pokes at one another through proxy wars for about a century. The Soviet Union stabilizes and doesn't collapse in 91 like it does in our timeline, yet it is actually China that rises as the mighty communist power in the East to challenge the filthy capitalist pigs of the decadent West. Eventually, the world starts to run low on resources, especially dinosaur juice. You know, that stuff that essentially keeps the wheels of civilized society turning round, and tensions rise further, which sees the Cold War progress to a conflict known as the Resource Wars. Europe gets in the ring with the Middle East for their oil, and China picks an open fight with the US. This results in China attacking Alaska for its oil. Canada, being the good neighbors they are, permits the US to use their country as a through line for troops so they can repel their dirty commies and let them protect their precious pipeline. But the US, for lack of a better term, starts to take the piss and begins taking Canada's stuff, which leads to mass protests, resistance movements, and a lot of violence all the way down to the civilian level, culminating in a failed attempt to sabotage the pipeline by an unknown force, which itself leads on to the US conveniently having a reason to justify Canada's annexation. No false flag, promise. However, none of this matters, because not long after these events, someone, somewhere, we still have no idea who, decides that enough is enough, and well, the world is covered in nuclear fire, in an exchange that lasts less than 2 hours. Even after a year to further reflect, I still can't quite figure out what the message or commentary here is, Tom. It's still just too damn subtle. The world is covered in radiation from the fallout, and most of humanity is wiped out. And what remains is just scraping by with next to no hope of recovery in a post-apocalyptic hellhole full of 1950s-looking crap. The tone of the world is one of nihilism, cynicism, topped off with thought-provoking dark humor. The wastelands of Fallout are dark, bleak settings filled with mutated wildlife, old broken 50s-looking sci-fi tech, malfunctioning killer robots, and most people are barely scraping by when they aren't trying to kill each other over the bottle caps they now use for currency. Yet, it all has this goofy naff B-movie coat of paint over it that will have you laughing at what is in reality some pretty disturbing shit. Minor Season 1 spoilers to follow on from now, guys, so if you haven't seen Season 1, you have been warned. Turn back now. Is this the end of humanity? Well, not quite. See, a totally not shady company called Vault-Tec, who totally aren't on track to be the primary antagonist faction in the show, had somehow predicted the impending nuclear disaster, and decided that it might be wise to construct sophisticated fallout shelters deep underground called vaults, for no other reason than to safeguard humanity. I mean, a company this benevolent certainly wouldn't use these life-saving prisons, shelters, and its inhabitants to conduct cruel, twisted experiments that would absolutely be outlawed in a civilized world. Right? And Season 1 of the show certainly didn't imply they could have potentially dropped the bombs themselves, or had at least been planning to pull the trigger before someone beat them to the punch, did it? Nah, in Vault Boy we trust. One of the three primary protagonists of the show, Lucy, is in fact from a vault, and serves as our fish-out-of-water character, kicking off Season 1 by leaving the safety of her vault and braving the wasteland in search of something. A textbook way to kick off a Fallout story, going all the way back to the first game. If you're new to the universe, she's likely who you'll latch onto because you'll learn about the world above alongside her. But the Vault Dwellers aren't the only ones who make it through the fire and radiation and shape this world. Some stragglers did survive the blaze through good old-fashioned hunkering down in less secure shelters, and those that don't choose to be Mad Max-style bandits, along with the Vault Dwellers that emerged, although some might argue escaped, from their vaults early, do what they can to rebuild society. Not all the survivors get off scot-free though. Cooper Howard, the ruthless gunslinging bounty hunter, and our second primary protagonist, and the guy I suspect was intended for veteran players of the series to latch onto, looks a little strange, doesn't he? Well, to refresh you all, that's because he's a ghoul. Through totally plausible scientific mumbo-jumbo, this guy has been exposed to an unbelievable amount of radiation, and instead of melting or shitting himself to death like you would in our world,
why am I not dead?
his cells have mutated to the degree where he is functionally immortal and immune to radiation, with the trade-off being that he now looks like he wants to go and pick a fight with Captain America.
I understood that reference.
Remember guys, two general types of ghouls to be on the lookout for in the wasteland: sentient ghouls and feral ghouls. Again, sentient ghouls for the most part.
Oh, friend!
Well, sort of. Feral ghouls, not so much. Season 1 has also introduced some new lore by which sentient ghouls must take a substance in order to ward off going feral. Many veteran fans didn't like this, as it's a fairly heavy retcon, but personally, I don't really have a problem with it. The show is set after all of the games, there's been plenty of time to study ghouls, the process and time frame by which they go feral beyond bad luck, and therefore, I think it's feasible they finally developed preventative measures. Cut the show some slack, guys, jeez, they've done a pretty good job of adapting this world. The ghouls aren't the only supernatural-looking beings you should be on the lookout for, though. Season 2's trailer has heavily suggested that we'll be getting our first live-action appearances of super mutants. Well, alive ones anyway. The long and the short of the super mutants are they are humans who have been exposed to an experimental pre-war virus called FEV, the Forced Evolutionary Virus. It makes humans bigger, stronger, and outright immune to radiation. However, like the ghouls, there is a trade-off, and it's arguably much worse than simply never getting laid again.
You wanna have sex?
For some guys, when they make it move, it gets all big and hard like a big pimple and then it pops. And they say it could happen to anybody, but it's gross.
9 times out of 10, they lose all memory of who they once were. Fewer still retain anything that resembles average human intelligence, and often develop aggressive and violent tendencies, making them hostile to almost anyone not like them. They're not all antisocial assholes though, and since the show is set on the West Coast where the FEV seemed to be a tad more stable, at least that's how most fans headcanon it, and it's been many years since the war between the humans of the Wasteland and the mutants backed by the creepy cult of the Unity, we should get to meet some friendly, or at the very least, some intelligent super mutants. Because of where the show is heading, I have my fingers crossed fan favorite Marcus and his civilized super mutant settlement Jacobstown is still knocking around. Come on, Bethesda, let's not be stingy with that fan service now. I want to see my buddy again. But before we get to a bit of history on Season 2's setting, let's have a quick refresh on the main factions and the changes they've undergone by Season 1. The first is the Brotherhood of Steel, which in the show we get to experience mainly through our third and final primary protagonist, Maximus, who some believe is there to represent the chaotic luck and chance builds some players of the game go for. Kind of tracks. Often distinguishable by the iconic Fallout power armor, these guys claim to be descended from what remained of the US military after the war. Initially an isolationist faction, whose original mandate was the preservation of valuable pre-war technology. To find it, hang on to it, and keep it out of dangerous hands until humanity is ready to learn from the mistakes of the past and rebuild. There used to be an argument that the Brotherhood, for the most part, while they were certainly not the nice guys, were part of the good guy factions. However, Season 1 of the show has ran with the fourth game's arc of casting the current day Brotherhood as more proactive, but much darker and oppressive, suggesting they're not evolving for the better. Don't get me wrong, they were always a bit quasi-religious and, well, let's just say it, cult-like. The Brotherhood, as depicted in Season 1, are borderline fanatical, and have, in essence, become an overly zealous parody of themselves. They are also highly fractured, and it seems they're heading down the path of civil war. Wouldn't be the first time either. To call them good guys now, stretching it even more than before. On the other side of the coin of old world governmental powers is the Enclave. And yeah, no arguing this, they are bad guys. Often distinguished from the Brotherhood by their soldiers wearing fancier-looking power armor, they claim to be what remains of the US government, as well as a continuation of it. Though, their ideals are far from the land of the free and the home of the brave, and definitely fall more in line with what would happen if you took Republican ideals, cranked them to ludicrous levels of satire, crossed it with some of the ideals favored by a certain toothbrush mustache-wearing political monster from our past, and slapped a dollop of Illuminati secret society gimmicks on top. The show is set roughly 55 years after the second game, where the bulk of the Enclave was wiped out as a credible threat, but Season 1 has confirmed they are alive and well. Though they don't appear to have the substantial military presence they had at their height, they have clearly re-established themselves to some degree, judging by this research facility. I doubt we'll get to see much of them in Season 2, since they never really had a huge presence in Vegas, but be on the lookout. But by far and wide the faction that's had the biggest shift from games to show, the NCR/New California Republic. This was the closest thing to a true democratic government in the Wasteland. It was a bit bloated and a bit corrupt, but they were the most prominent governmental force we saw that wasn't hiding and hoarding, trying to enslave everyone, or outright genocide other factions in the name of purity, and even had anti-discrimination laws for mutants and ghouls, which the other factions most certainly do not. But you may have noticed that subtle emphasis on the word were. Remember in the first video when I made a joke about how they were so big and powerful that unless they were miraculously toppled within 15 years, they should be the most prominent force of order we see? Well, their capital has been nuked, and besides a few stragglers like this lady and being a history lesson in Vault 4, they had no discernible presence in Season 1. This isn't to say they've been totally destroyed, but they've clearly been dragged through the ringer, and it's not clear if they're a major power anymore. And that can segue us into where Season 2 is headed. Vegas, baby! So, for those who haven't played the games, here's the most crucial background lore for New Vegas. There's many cool and interesting locations in the Mojave Wasteland, but the two that truly matter are Hoover Dam and New Vegas itself. The city is one of the few places in Fallout America that was spared direct nuclear strikes, thanks in no small part to Robert House, the CEO of the powerful robotics company Robco, whom we saw in Season 1 on Vault-Tec's Shadow Council. This shady motherfucker has himself encased in a stasis pod, hooked up to several life support devices that would prolong his life significantly, as well as a supercomputer that lets him control the systems of his citadel, the Lucky 38 Casino, seen here in the show. Alongside this, he installs extensive missile defense systems within the city, meaning only 9 out of the 77 nukes sent here manage to break through, and even they are only able to hit areas near the city, sparing Vegas itself, but turning a lot of the surrounding Mojave Desert into a wasteland. This kept New Vegas a relatively intact hub of civilization, and though things still turned rough and tribal thanks to food and water shortages and just general lawlessness, order was eventually restored by House and his army of Securitron robots, who took the 3 most prominent and powerful tribes and turned them essentially into mafia families, is probably the closest equivalent, that helped him bring New Vegas under control. House then imposes an autocratic rule over the city, restricting the Strip exclusively to the haves and shunting the have-nots into surrounding slums that later become known as Freeside. To power his kingdom, Mr. House also secures Hoover Dam, which also made it through the 9 boom booms pretty much intact, making it a major source of electricity and clean water in the Mojave. 2 things that are just a teeny little bit valuable in a post-nuked world. Certainly valuable enough to be worth fighting over, and lo and behold, war never changes. The NCR want the dam and move into the Mojave to claim it, as do a newly emerged but very large and powerful faction called Caesar's Legion, led by a guy who has titled himself, shockingly, Caesar. You're not fooling anyone though, Salo. The name's Ed. The Legion has seriously deep lore, but the basics you'll need to know are they were, and probably still are, Roman cosplay enthusiasts made up of many forcefully unified tribes who are super big into totalitarianism, slavery, and Hegelian dialectics. They too want the dam, and are prepared to take it by force. House, being as smart as he is shady, realizes he can't fight both factions at full strength, and must make a choice between the two if he wishes to preserve the sovereignty of Vegas and keep the dam safe. Shockingly, House decides to back the side that aren't slaving imperialist dictators. I know, I don't get it either, and cedes the dam to the NCR in a fragile peace treaty that recognized House and his 3 big mafia families as the sovereign stewards of the New Vegas Strip, in exchange for the NCR being able to use the power the dam produces and be permitted a political and military presence in Vegas. But don't think that deterred this dickhead here. The Legion still want to have a go because they think they're hard enough, resulting in the first Battle of Hoover Dam. And how does it go? The NCR decisively beat the Legion back. It's costly, but they retain control of the dam. And this brings us to the events of New Vegas the game. There is a lot of cool shit going on in this masterpiece. So many colourful characters and factions, you really can't cram it into a single video. But to be to the point, the main narrative centers around the player, the NCR, the Legion, and House, and the importance of this dam. If you control Hoover Dam, you essentially control the Mojave. The Brotherhood chapter here has been diminished and driven into hiding by the NCR after a little scuff over an old weapon system disguising itself as a power plant. So they don't have much influence or a big part to play really. I would even go as far as to say they are a fucking footnote. But House, the NCR, and the Legion are all licking their wounds, and they're all getting ready to seize the dam in totality. Even House and the NCR are readying to break their treaty so they don't have to split the prize pot anymore, and it eventually boils over and leads to a second Battle of Hoover Dam, where either the NCR secure it once and for all and annex the region, which, yeah, don't think that happened. House takes it and makes New Vegas its own technologically advanced state under his autocratic rule. The Legion win, enslave and conquer the Mojave, or the player known as the Courier can make moves to grant New Vegas true independence and sort of make it its own anarchic state. This does raise an interesting question about Season 2, because while the showrunners have said they want to employ the fog of war and keep it as vague as possible as to who won, the fact that each faction's questline has you doing some pretty irreparable and significant damage to the other factions and their upper leadership means they're likely going to have to address it at least a little. And the trailer for the second season does seem to hint as to who might have won. They spend a reasonable amount of time in Season 1 building Mr. House up as a key figure in the Vault-Tec conspiracies. Combine this with Hanks heading to Vegas, House's seemingly brief appearance with Cooper in the Season 2 trailer, and the fact the other three factions' questlines are unprogressible without eliminating Mr. House, along with what seems to be the destruction of the NCR's central command, and it seems House might have taken it. But the apparent dilapidated state of New Vegas, as seen in the closing scenes of Season 1, seems to indicate that, no matter who won, things went south either way. The Season 2 trailer has confirmed there are tatters of NCR personnel knocking around, and the Legion looks to be alive and well. It's possible every faction may have survived in some form, some recovering, some strengthening, and others merely shadows of what they once were. As we've seen with the NCR, war never changes, but the Wasteland certainly does. And a lot can happen in 15 years. I guess we'll have to wait and see. And that'll do it, Tom, and should refresh and prep you and our viewers who have never played the games for Season 2. What are your hopes for this season? Where do you think it's going? Let us know down below.